So an ecosystem is just a group, a whole bunch of the community, right? So it's a bunch of organisms that all live together. But the difference between a community and an ecosystem is when we look at an ecosystem, we also consider all of their abiotic features. So all of the non-living things. Yep.
What does it say for particular?
Locale. So particular locale, a particular geographic area. So when we look at the ecosystem, we look at the geographic area. We look at, hi, Mrs. Carl.
Mrs. Carl, you said your hobby weren't going to be back for a while. You missed us.
You know,
We're not talking about parasites right now.
no, we're talking about ecosystems.
These have much happier than parasites. Although you need parasites for ecosystems.
Yeah, I was gonna say parasites are an essential part of ecosystems. Mrs. Carl, do you know what's awesome?
What's awesome?
I spent all of yesterday in 6th hour complaining that I was hungry,
Yeah.
and I asked the same kid over and over again for snacks. Guess what he did today?
Did you bring your snacks? Who was it?
It was Newt.
That one he got to teach.
He did, he got to teach because I got snacks, so I needed to sit down and eat, so he got to teach, so I could eat. Yes?
If I bring you food out one day, can I teach?
No.
Yeah. This is a totalitarian society. She owns all of you.
You didn't even participate in gym. So, do you want to teach, Shadow?
I'm bringing in hamburgers on the class.
The floor is yours. You are a much more brave Shadow than... This is what I did last hour.
Wait.
This Bluefield with the same like I was hungry in the second hour, so I asked to go to the bathroom, but instead of going to the bathroom, I bought a coffee. Yeah.
That eat other things, right? So our herbivore eats what? Plants. Our carnivore eats meat. Omnivore eats. Our detritivore is one we're not all familiar with. And the reason we're not familiar with it is, well, it's kind of gross and it's kind of special, but it's kind of important. It doesn't necessarily fit in any of the other categories. Detritivores eat dead stuff. Now you're like, that's not that amazing. Like lots of things eat dead stuff. But detritivores are not decomposers. They're the ones like a fungus, right? They're decomposers. They're not decomposers, but instead what they do is scavenge. So they're turkey buzzards, they're vultures. They eat stuff that they didn't kill. Hyenas. They eat stuff that they did not kill. But they won't eat anything that's decomposing. So it has to be a fresh kill. As soon as that thing is infected with the decomposers, with the bacteria that will decompose them, detritivores will no longer eat it. But I say they're an essential part of a lot of ecosystems because, quite frankly, we've all seen roadkill, right? Yeah. If roadkill weren't torn apart into a bunch of littler pieces by detritivores, it would be sitting on the side of the road a lot longer than it actually is. So detritivores assist decomposers by taking the dead thing and tearing it up into smaller pieces in advance. You look horrified.
Yeah, so, so they just go around picking up the scraps.
Mm-hmm.
The butchers of nature.
So like me,
Deer on high this morning.
AJ?
So like, how can they tell it being decomposed?
Yes, it's putrid once it's being decomposed. So it's smelly, it's bloated, it's covered with flies. Detritivores aren't going to touch anything that already have maggots or flies or anything like that on it. That would be gross.
Aren't maggots full of proteins though?
So yeah, they're fussy about the kind of dead stuff. Decomposers, on the other hand, decomposers do eat dead stuff as well, but they are a different kind of dead stuff eating than our detritivores. Decomposers work by fragmenting and leaching dead things into smaller pieces and make those nutrients available to the entire system again. So they make things available to the rest of the system. Detritivores do not. Their function in the ecosystem is not to recycle nutrients
So they make things.
available for other members of the ecosystem.
Wait, who does that?
The decomposers.
Oh,
Detritivores don't. They just eat because they're hungry.
Make things available for.
The rest of the system.
when you say things, is that like nutrients?
Yeah. So nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon.
Wouldn't that be a beneficial interaction? So I think I'm saying this wrong. When the table I did yesterday, plus.
But it wouldn't be because the other thing is dead.
So it doesn't care. So it'd be,
But
so that could be a
but
neutral
if they were
one.
interacting with the not the parasites, the
That could be
decomposers,
commensalism.
and with the actual ecosystem, not just the animal.
Well, when we do a pairwise interaction table, we only look at 2 species at a time. We look at living things and we look at 2 species at a time. So you wouldn't, it's an essential role in the ecosystem, but it's not a symbiosis.
So
It's not a symbiosis. So you're not going to find one on the table that it is.
parasitism.
Nope, it's not that either. It's not a pairwise interaction.
I was trying to be smart, and look where it got me.
Well, let's think about a fly. Flies, flies you would put in category of decomposer, though the adult fly itself, we don't necessarily think of it. The important role that flies play in decomposition is the deposition of their eggs on a carcass. It's the maggots that eat the carcass that are more important.
Would they eat the eggs?
In the old days, it's probably just maggots.
An organism typically can be in more than one trophic level, though we usually group it in only one of those categories. Typically when we think of carnivores, we think of something that does the killing itself. So when we think of carnivore, do you want to switch places, by the way? Yeah. You don't have to stay stranded up there.
Because we technically don't kill ourselves.
Well, it's not that, it's that we technically don't currently kill it ourselves. If we were left to our own devices, if we had to, if there was no Kroger or Hiller's or Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, we could easily kill our own food ourselves. We used to be hunter-gatherers. So we're still carnivores, well, omnivores really. We're still omnivores because if, the modern conveniences didn't exist, we would kill our own food. Carnivores are quite typically responsible for the death of the thing that they're eating. That takes us to an interesting types of predators. And as I write that, however, the other kind of predator that we don't call a true predator is a grazer. Yeah, like a cow, right? The grass doesn't end up dead. The grass simply says, ouch. It ends up maimed. It doesn't end up dead. I mean, it's got to be better than dead, right? Maimed, dead, maimed, dead.
So grazers just eat like plants?
Grazers will only eat plants.
Wait, they eat only what?
Is that's a little bit simple. We start at the bottom of any ecosystem with primary producers. Primary producers, we put them at the bottom of an ecosystem because their existence supports the rest of the entire ecosystem. So we put them at the bottom. Those things are plants, typically on land. They are plants, they're autotrophs. Plants on land. And from there, in water, typically also algae. So plants and algae. Those are, autotrophs. They don't have an omnivore, herbivore, or any of that name. They're not, they don't eat anything because they make their own food, so we don't have to label them with insert type of eater here.
Are there any animals that will be all four kinds of animal, like omnivore?
You can't be.
Carnivore and herbivore if you're not.
I'm an omnivore and an herbivore.
Oh,
Something sending through, like the question I asked her about how to die, that one I did not. But, I meant to ask the no, I'm not gonna give up. What one where it eats the dead but not decomposed things?
A detritivore?
Yes, if there's an animal where it's a detritivore and what's that? And another one like besides omnivore.
Okay, if it's a detritivore, that means it eats meat that's dead.
Yeah, but what are there any that meat that's dead and alive, but that
Mohammed, stop.
not that? Oh my gosh!
I think I get what you're saying. I think I get what you're saying. No, I think I get what you're saying. You mean dead things and alive things, plants and animals.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah.
After that, we have primary consumers. So, our primary consumers eat all of the autotrophs, so they are herbivores. So if we're trying to put them in a trophic level, we would call them herbivores.
Can you spell that?
Which one?
Herb.
Herbivore? Herbivore.
Is it herbivore or herbivore?
Herbivore.
Herb.
Are you British?
Herb. Sound like an herb.
It's like
Herbivore.
Wait, what's the second?
Consumer.
Herbivore?
So, after our primary consumers, we have secondary consumers. Secondary consumers eat the primary consumers. If you're eating another animal, you are a carnivore, though some of these are also omnivores. Some of these are also omnivores, so they are not necessarily only carnivores. They are omnivores or carnivores.
So it could eat primary producers or primary consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Omnivores or what?
So as we look at these, the top level consumer is a tertiary consumer, and we typically stop at top level. We stop at 4. Most ecosystems will not go beyond 4 trophic levels. And the reason is because of the horrible inefficiencies. Each trophic level only gets about 10% of the energy from the level below it. The rest of it, 90% of it, gets wasted. So if you think about it, if you're going to reside at the top level, you have to eat an awful lot from the level below you to get a sufficient amount of energy for life. There's not that much energy available to you because 90% of energy gets wasted. Why? That second law of thermodynamics, that one about, entropy being on the rise, means a whole awful lot is wasted. It's often lost as indigestible matter or heat. Mm-hmm.
So it could technically just keep going up.
If there were more available energy.
So do the tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers and the secondary?
The way that we do this when we is we're going to relate them to look at energy flow, because that's what this is all really about, energy flow and nutrient cycling. And if we do it to look at energy flow, I want to point something out. When I draw an arrow, the arrow always points in the direction of energy flow. The arrow points in the direction of energy flow. So, like this.
It's a rabbit.
Same thing.
My flower is better.
Yeah, no.
Wait, so like, this is on that triangle that we made, would the arrow be going up because that's the flow of energy?
So here, in this feeding relationship, we go from flower to rabbit. That's the direction the arrow points. That does not mean that the flower eats the rabbit. That means that the energy is flowing from our producer to our primary consumer.
Dog.
It's the dragon.
No. Is that a wolf?
Yay!
In the mouth.
My bunny is on point right now.
Then
So was mine.
the energy goes from the rabbit
Oh, his face is a little small.
goes from the rabbit to the insert carnivore here. I indicated that it was a carnivore by giving it very pointy teeth.
There's my rabbit.
Beautiful.
Look at its face, like, his eyes are so small. Beautiful.
It's a fabulous rabbit.
My flower.
So
That
we have our random carnivore eating our rabbit. If we're labeling trophic levels, we have a primary producer, a primary consumer, and a secondary consumer here. We would call that first trophic level. First trophic level is our primary producer. Our second trophic level here would be our rabbit, our primary consumer. And our third trophic level would be our insert name of carnivore here.
I made a new animal called the Doppelganger.
Good.
Duck with a mop in
You were honestly a 4-year-old.
So it's the first, second, and third trophy.
However, in real life, they're never this simple. This is a food chain, right? One direct path of energy. It's never that. Oh, my friends, it looks more like this.
I feel like this one's gonna have a lot more like.
Mm-hmm.
Snake.
Mm-hmm.
That was
No, it's no. That's you're mean.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, you don't even know.
butterfly.
Come on, look over there. What?
That's me.
That's world.
This is a long moose.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, your brother cooked for some moose.
My brother? He's terrible at everything.
I can't eat a lot.
I got you, Harvey.
That's what he said.
I had to pay all the stickers. Miss Blue feels this. Yeah, that sounds.
I'm not entirely sure yet.
Me, honestly, I think it's a no.
I mean,
I think that's a fact. It's a
all right. Uh-oh.
What are the bees?
Those are birds.
They're
Bird.
Have you not seen a bird
Never seen a
before?
bird like that before.
Yeah.
Is that a honey badger?
Yes.
That's a fox.
There we go.
Is it a fox?
Oh, and I forgot somebody.
Is it me?
Yeah.
A mushroom decomposer.
You say it's a no.
So as we look at this diagram, now we have to draw arrows. The rabbit eats what?
The plants.
What eats the rabbit?
Fox? Yeah. Fox?
Fox, okay.
The moose.
What does the squirrel eat?
Acorn. In the tree.
What eats the squirrel?
Fox. Fox just hung up.
What does the moose eat?
The fox.
Grass.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's the weed patch.
What does the bird eat? What does the butterfly eat?
The mushroom. Butterflies eat
What does the skunk eat?
mushrooms. That's what gives it its thing. I thought that.
And the
Wait,
butterfly.
what does
And the butterfly too.
I think she's drawing
I'm
bugs.
Ants.
Bugs. I don't know what that is.
Ants.
I had to give the skunk something to eat.
Well, I can eat the mushrooms.
Because they don't eat mushrooms, they eat insects.
Does anything on that napkin?
What eats the fox?
Oh, wouldn't you want to eat fungi?
What eats the fox? Well, unfortunately, nothing in this particular ecosystem, mostly because I've run out of room. But if we put like a puma or a mountain lion or a really big hawk,
Can a hawk really kill a fox?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easily.
Oh yeah.
I've seen it happen. I've seen it come before. No, I haven't.
I was trying to add a snake, but his tongue got too big. The snake eats.
This squirrel
The snake could eat the squirrel,
eats the insects.
or it could eat the insects, or the rabbit.
Or the butterfly. Ooh, that
So-
has a big appetite.
And then here's where it gets even worse. We have mushrooms on this diagram, right?
Mushrooms eat it all.
They eat everything, right? Once everything else dies, they eat it. This is what happens in real ecosystems. A food chain is rarely how it works. It's usually a food web. To display every possible interaction as far as nutritional relationships here. Notice this is a nutritional relationship. This is not a symbiosis. It's a nutritional relationship, as in who eats whom. To show all of them in a food web would be virtually impossible for every ecosystem. We can try. It would tax my art skills, because at this point, this is already pretty well taxed my art skills. So this is what we got. Facebook creators.
Definitely tax my art skills with that rabbit. That rabbit has problems with the show.
There we go.
That's better. Pictures. I can handle pictures.
What is that fox eating?
So you'll notice here that this is a particular ecosystem in question. This would be an Arctic ecosystem, which is why it includes an Arctic hare, an ermine, and a lemming, as well as a snowy owl. Here, rather than labeling each individual, you'll notice they grouped them based on trophic levels. Down here it says, oh, that's not a good color to write on. There we go. Down here it says first trophic level. And you'll notice that the energy flows from the first trophic level to the second trophic level, and from the second to the higher trophic levels. Trophic level 3 and 4 got lumped together into one trophic level here because, quite frankly, you'll notice there's some feeding relationships in between our trophic levels. So the human can eat the fox, which eats the wolf. The human, apparently, according to this, eats a snowy owl. I feel like it'd be bony. Like, that would be a lot of work for a very small yield.
But maybe it'd be good.
Hey.
What's on the, like, top right, like the highest?
This one?
No, the,
Oh, this one?
yeah.
An Arctic fox. You thought the one? This is an Arctic wolf. So, you'll notice the wolf here and the fox here, the wolf and the fox can eat the lemming, the hare, and, well, the vole would be more of what the falcon would eat, because, and the owl. What is this? It's a lemming. A vole.
I want to hold it.
So everybody who's grouped in the higher trophic levels are actually really the third and fourth trophic level put together. The one here that I would call the top level consumer, the one that can eat all others if it so chose, would be the human in the upper left corner. This one? The falcon? This one? Snowy owl? This one?
No, the one under no.
The one directly under the orange fox.
Oh, this one! An ermine. It's a small mink-like animal.
I eat those every day.
So, as we look at these, there are one more group I need to point out here who we haven't yet looked at, who doesn't, well, they just don't count towards trophic levels. Our parasites, fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes. We don't usually include them in a trophic level because they can feed at any trophic level, well, those specifically feed at any of the above trophic levels. They don't feed on the plants. They have no real interest in any of the vegetation. They want blood. At least these three parasites do. There are parasites upon plants. You'll notice decomposers get lost on this too. There are no decomposers listed. Because decomposers can eat at every trophic level, we also don't include them in the standard diagram or food web.
So doesn't that make them like the top? Because they eat everything.
You would think that it would make them the top, but it doesn't. It violates that 10% rule, that 10% of the energy. So we don't need water. Can we assist you in any way?
I'm certified CPR. May I help you?
On yourself.
The CDC. You are mean.
It took me by surprise.
So as we look at this particular pyramid, this shows us a little bit more simply all of our individual trophic levels. The first level, our primary producers, are the first trophic level. The second level, our primary consumers, second trophic level. Then we have a box full of snakes. They would be our third trophic level. And up at the top, of course, because we can't just mash the falcon into a truly tiny box, we put it up at the very top as the top level, or the fourth trophic level.
Stay humble.
Man, you know, if he's trying to keep your
That's
straight,
gonna be my new
that's
thing.
I like when people come
It tears it.
I won't straight
So it swallows the whole.
I'm not serious.
You ever seen Freddy?
But I
Freddy the Falcon?
I love
You ever looked at Freddy's beak?
Yeah. It's like,
It's pointy, right? It's a hook. Freddy has exceptionally sharp claws with which he digs into his prey and carries it off, and then uses its pointed beak to tear into the flesh to rip it into little pieces.
Hey man, that's what we're doing tonight. You see,
That's what they do. They tear it apart.
I'm about to eat like a bird.
Good luck with that. You'll notice something typically also happens to the size of the organisms as we move up trophic levels.
They get a lot bigger.
They get bigger. So as we start down at the bottom with our autotrophs, those are fairly small organisms. Now you have some violations to those rules, like a giant sequoia. Yeah, that's an autotroph, and it's enormous. But for the most part, they get increasingly larger as you move up the trophic level. The larger the organism gets, the more food it requires. It is our 10% rule, right? They do just eat plants. They're kind of one of those, like the giant sequoia, the strange violations to the rule. But they also have to eat a lot, right?
they need a lot of it. Much like me.
So as we look at these, I do want to point out the 10% rule is absolutely true. Here's our 10% rule. Yep.
Well, for snakes, I don't think they feel that. My aunt has a snake and she feeds it like once a month.
The nature.
Don't they keep it in there?
Yes. The thing about snakes. Well, the thing about snakes that makes them weird is that they are cold-blooded, right? And because if given the option, if they are warm and they are safe, they don't really move. Right? Like they just kind of like curl up and sit there under a light. If adequately fed, once a month is sufficient. And they are such slow digesters because they're for an animal, they're actually fairly simple. They don't have to regulate body temperature. They rely on a light. If they aren't threatened, they don't move. So, and if you think about the size of organism that they eat compared to the size of their body, they can eat something actually bigger than them, right? Like, their diapsid skull allows them to take their jaw off and swallow things that should not, in theory, fit inside of them. And if you ever have had the pleasure of watching snakes be fed at the zoo, you may actually notice that you can see the thing inside of the snake, right?
Yeah, I learned it's like SpongeBob.
Yeah, it's a lump. It is true.
What if they're still alive?
A snake, right? Then wouldn't those kidneys feel like this big?
They have truly tiny organs, yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't they be so small?
They also have truly tiny brains. Just about everything in a snake is small. They will, snakes are kind of weird in that they will kind of eat, anything. Snakes in the wild will eat a bit more frequently. And the reason that snakes in the wild will eat more frequently is because their next meal is not a guarantee. And their safety isn't a guarantee, right? Like, they have to move. They have to find sunny spots. There's a reason why on a sunny day.
Interruption. I'd just like to announce this